Hey, it's me, the Quenchies. I'm that late afternoon craving you just can't shake. Wait, what's that? Welch's Grape Aid? No! Made with real fruit and no added sugar, nothing answers the call of the Quenchies like Grape Aid. Got the Quenchies? Grab a Grape Aid in your juice aisle.
If you've got a socially anxious teenager, the thing is not to talk to them about how to feel comfortable in social situations. As soon as you say to a kid, look, oh, you're so nice, or this is a really fun party, you're saying to them, in order for you to be in a social situation, the goal is for you to feel calm, for you to feel comfortable, for you to feel okay. As soon as you give that message to a socially anxious kid, either they're out, they're not going to go, which is a whole other host of problems, or they're going to try and find a way to feel comfortable.
Welcome to Season 7 of Flusterclux with Lynn Lyons, where we'll talk about managing anxiety and all the other emotions too. We tackle the serious stuff without being too serious. I'm your co-host, Robin. I'm Lynn's sister-in-law, and I'm here to ask your questions.
And I'm Lynn Lyons. I'm an anxiety expert, speaker, mom, and author. I've been a therapist for 35 years. Parenting can be a flusterclux, and I'm here to help you find your way. I'll tell you what to do and what to say.
Hey, Lynn.
Hey, Robin.
Do you want to introduce our very special guest today?
Yes, she is a very special guest. We have joining us, much to my delight, Jessica Lahey. She is the best-selling author of a book called The Gift of Failure, which is how she entered my awareness. It's a fabulous book. And then her second book called The Addiction Inoculation, which sings the song that is so near and dear to my heart. It is the song of prevention. It is the song of paying attention to what we're doing now to try and get ahead of what is a very common problem. And I loved it. And I loved its approach. I love the research. I love the voice. And so, Jessica, we are delighted to have you here.
Thank you so much. That's such a nice introduction.
Oh, well, thanks. I just did it off the top of my head.
It means, writers, we're a solitary lot. We tend to sit in our little offices and do our work. And then it's like always surprising to me that things end up out there in the big world and that they affect people and impact people. And it just means a lot to me. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You also have a podcast called #AmWriting, which I also listen to. And there were times when I was writing my last book where I searched through and I was like, I need a pep talk. And so I found a few great episodes of you guys talking about writing because you are a writer. I'm also a writer because I've written books and I write a lot of articles, but it is painful for me.
Yeah. Oh, I'm in the middle right now of finishing up a proposal for a book that I'm actually quite excited about, but writing proposals is one of the most monotonous details about stuff that you got to go check all it's a lot of stuff. And, there's just times when you really need a push. And I tend to I talk about this on the podcast, like Stephen King's On Writing, or, listen to just a really good book where I say, oh my gosh, that's what I'm aiming for. So I'm grateful. And, the reason we started the podcast was to flatten the learning curve for other writers and keep them writing and get the work done. Don't just get the work started, but get the work done. And been around for 420 episodes now. And we'll keep doing it as long as people keep telling us that it's helping them get the work done.
It does help get the work done, for sure. I can attest to that. So, fellow writer and fellow prevention thinker, we would really like to focus today. I know that both of your books really dovetail with each other. I love the message in The Gift of Failure, of course, because that's what I do all the time as a clinician, talk about developing skills and independence and autonomy. But I would love to ask you some questions about the things that you discovered while writing The Addiction Inoculation. Mm-hmm. So is it okay if I just dive in?
Go ahead.
Okay. And Robin will dive in too. Okay. So tell our listeners what is currently, and maybe you discovered this from writing the book and maybe you knew it already, what is currently the biggest myth that you want to bust about parents and kids and substance use and drinking?
So the biggest myth that I tend to, it's sort of two smashed together. And this is also where people get the angriest at me, where I get emails, I get comments on, like I make all these videos and Anyway, I made a video about this and I had to do 6 follow-up videos with very specific advice and very specific data because people got so angry. So the first one is that myth about if you let kids sip at home, they'll turn into these like moderate European drinkers who it's not a big deal for them. And they just sort of, they'll know how to manage it because it won't be a huge deal. And I 100% believed that. I wrote the addiction inoculation when my eldest was still in college and my younger kid was in high school. I also, by the way, got sober in 2013. So I have 11 and a half years sober, but that book very much came out of the fact that I couldn't find the book I wanted on like best practices for education and for parenting. So that idea that if we give kids sips that they'll somehow grow up to be moderate drinkers, totally a myth for a bunch of reasons. Number one, for people who can't learn moderation like me, no amount of me witnessing other people or people giving me sips and saying, here, just have a few sips, that'll make you moderate. That doesn't work. Number two, the European Union as a whole has the highest rates of illness attributable to alcohol consumption and deaths according to alcohol consumption attributable to alcohol consumption in the entire world. That comes from the World Health Organization Europe data. So here's where people get freaked out and they're like, oh, but there's exceptions. And what about this country? And what about that country? The cool thing is the countries that are the exceptions to that rule are countries where as a community, it's just not acceptable to be falling over drunk in public. And those countries, because of those sort of community guidelines that have been passed down from generation to generation, there's just a little bit less drinking. And yes, we can look at the countries individually. The other issue is that the younger a kid is when they first have a drink of alcohol or some weed or whatever it is, the higher statistical chances that they're going to develop substance use disorder over their lifetime. So 8th grade, it's around 50%. It drops by half. If we wait for another 2 years, it gets down to like 21%. And then if we wait another 2 years till they're 18, it drops in half again down to somewhere around 10 or 11%, which is great. The other big one is, the kids are going to drink anyway, so I'll have them all over to my house and I'll take away everyone's keys and that way at least they'll be safe. You're fooling yourself. Number one, you're raising your own child's likelihood of developing substance use disorder. Number two, it's a felony in most states. Number three, you're also, because peer cohort is such an important part of risk for developing substance use disorder, you're also raising the risk for your friends of your kids. Those are the big ones. Giving kids sips at home is not going to teach them to be a moderate drinker. It's not going to teach them to not freak out when alcohol is around. And you're actually, depending on how early you do it, raising their risk for developing substance use disorder.
Yeah, I often tell the families that I'm working with that if you allow your child to practice drinking, you're just helping them practice drinking.
Yeah.
I think the numbers you just listed, that the earlier a child starts to use alcohol, the greater the likelihood that they're going to develop substance use disorder. And is that for other substances too? Is that for anything?
Yeah, that's across the board. And, as someone who's married to someone who has a lot of fluency with statistics and as the mother of a mathematician and economist, I have to say there are statistical confounders in there. Obviously, a kid who has more access to alcohol at a younger age is going to be more likely to drink at a younger age. And that means that possibly their genetic likelihood is higher because they may have parents who have problems with alcohol. All of that is in there. But if you look at the statistics overall, the younger the kids start using, drinking, whatever, the higher their lifelong risk. Once I wrote this book, we changed the rules in our house. My oldest was allowed sips. My oldest was allowed his own glass of champagne at like dinners and stuff. And then my daughter, she knows what I know about the statistics because that's part of teaching substance use prevention to kids, teaching them how their brains work and why alcohol consumption during adolescence is way more dangerous than alcohol consumption during, and this goes for all addictive substances. The brain isn't finished developing yet, blah, blah, blah. So my daughter has to live under different rules, which is no, not until your brain is done developing. You could go with not until it's legal for you. And in her, that's in 17 days. It makes for some weird things. Like she had a friend here from another country where it is legal at 18 in that country. And I said, I'm really sorry, but in this house, before your brains are done developing / you hit around 21, we don't give underage people alcohol in this house. That's just the rule. And the kid from the other country was very understanding about it. the teens made some faces and made fun of me a little. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm fine with that. So
the first two stats that you talked about are decisions and beliefs that parents who drink hold. Sober parents don't hold those beliefs.
yeah. So this is really interesting. So one of my jobs was I worked in a drug and alcohol rehab for adults. And my job was there to talk to them about prevention stuff, to talk about that with their kids. And it's really interesting how getting sober changes your ability, your willingness to hear some of this. The parents who are actively drinking or haven't dealt with their own stuff. Because I certainly wouldn't have wanted to have heard that when I was still actively drinking. That would have been a real challenge for me. It's also the reason, by the way, so I spend most of my time as a speaker. I'm out on the road, traveling a lot as a speaker. What I have learned is that it's very difficult to get people to come to substance use prevention events, even when the school knows that it's really part of their mandate to provide them. So we have started combining the two books, and essentially we get people there under the guise of The Gift of Failure, which is great because as I said, the subjects overlap. And then during the part about connection and competence and skill building and mastery and specifically self-efficacy, that's when I bring out the substance use prevention guns. And what's fascinating is that even when we sort of launch that on people when they weren't expecting it, every single time I get emails saying, I really, really needed to hear that stuff. And you're right, I wouldn't have come. Because I say specifically, sorry to launch this on you like this, but we find it's really difficult to get people to come because that's an intimidating subject. It freaks people out. And people email me and say, you are absolutely right. I might not have attended a substance use prevention talk, but I really needed to hear that stuff. You know, it's just been the way we've had to do it in order to get people to hear some really important stuff. And I'm still giving them the stuff that was advertised. I'm just also giving them a little bit of substance use prevention. As someone in recovery, it's also an incredible opportunity for me. I give everyone my email address and I get to be a resource. If I don't know the answer, I can help them find it. And that's part of something I'm incredibly honored to be able to do.
Let's go. We'll take a break and we'll be right back.
Americans take about 20,000 breaths a day and spend an average of 90% of their time indoors.
The indoor air that we breathe can be up to 100 times more polluted than outdoor air, according to the EPA. I mean, stop and think about that. Indoor air pollutants can cause respiratory symptoms like sneezing, congestion, scratchy throat, even more serious health problems like lung and heart disease.
So what's the solution? Introducing Air Doctor, the air purifier that filters out 99.99% of dangerous contaminants so your lungs don't have to. This includes allergens, pollens, pet dander, dust mites, mold spores, even bacteria and viruses.
Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you don't love it, just send it back for a refund minus shipping. Head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code Flusterclux and you'll receive up to $300 off air purifiers. Exclusive to podcast customers, you will also receive a free 3-year warranty on any unit, which is an additional $84 value.
Lock this special offer by going to AIRDOCTORPRO.com and use promo code Flusterclux.
You know, Lynn, I love fall, Halloween and leaf peeping, but the fall is actually your and my busiest travel season.
It is.
And can I tell you why I'm so obsessed with Liquid IV?
Go ahead.
Okay, it was actually you and your passion for Liquid IV, and I cannot tell you how much I love having a cold bottle of water with Liquid IV on my flights. Now it is my ritual.
Yeah, I have a hard time just pounding water, so even when I'm on a plane and they come by and say, what can I get you to drink? I'm like, oh, I know I should drink water. But if I've got Liquid IV, I'm really going to drink it. I keep a container of it in my refrigerator all the time. I do a ton of hiking, and having that there to drink and rehydrate has been so easy for me to do something that I know is so good for me.
Well, their new hydration multiplier and immune support comes in mango passion fruit, which is my favorite flavor. And with 5 times the daily value of vitamin C and 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, you give your body and the immune system the support it needs while you are feeling like you're on your way to the tropics.
And Liquid IV is always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. So tear pour, live more. One stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. Support everyday wellness with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code FLUSTER at checkout.
That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code FLUSTER at liquidiv.com. This message is sponsored by Greenlight. As your kids get older, some things about parenting get easier, like they'll get dressed in the morning for school by themselves. But others don't, like having that conversation about money. And the fact is, kids won't really know how to manage their money until they're actually in charge of it. And that's where Greenlight can help.
Greenlight is a debit card and a money app for families. Parents can send money to their kids, keep an eye on kids' spending and saving. Kids and teens build money confidence and lifelong financial literacy skills.
With the Greenlight app, kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely, thanks to games that teach money skills in a fun, accessible way.
The Greenlight app also includes a chores feature where you can set up one-time or recurring chores. You can customize it to your family's needs.
I love it. Makes it really easy to pay them for the projects that I give them because, let's face it, we're busy and sometimes we forget and then they don't want to do the chores the next time.
Yeah, and I think that helping kids understand that you can earn money, that you can do things responsibly, and save money. I think one of the great things that we can do with our money financial literacy with kids is teach kids that saving money in order to spend it on something worthwhile is a great practice to have. And this app helps parents and kids do that together.
Millions of parents and kids are learning about money on Greenlight, and it's the easy, convenient way for parents to raise financially smart kids and families to navigate this financial life together.
So sign up for Greenlight today and get your first month free when you go to greenlight.com/fluster. That's greenlight.com/fluster to try Greenlight for free.
Greenlight.com/fluster.
Okay, we're back. Okay, so I'm going to tell you something that's going to bum you out.
Okay, tell me.
So I have a clinical practice and I see a lot of teenagers and young adults. And here's what I've been hearing lately. The drink with your parents is back on trend. Do you know this?
I live in Vermont and I know the weed with your parents is something that has been a thing here too. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, and I know it's funny, Robin, you say the people who drank with their kids were the people that were also drinking. Like I look back at the family that used to have the parties and Mrs. B was clearly an alcoholic. Looking back at it, I'm like, oh, but kids are telling me now that they know the families, they know the houses where the parents do shots with the kids. And the whole way that they justify it is that they are addressing the drunk driving part of it.
Right.
Like you say, as long as they're safe. And I've been surprised in the last year to hear more and more kids tell me, yeah, no, that's kind of a thing again.
Parents who have a permissive stance on drugs and alcohol have kids with much higher rates of substance use disorder over their lifetime than parents who have a consistent and clear message of not until your brain is done developing. The other reason I don't use not until it's legal for you is because that's a just because answer, because I said so kind of answer. Whereas not until your brain is done developing opens the door for lots of conversations around the fact that, for example, kids who are smoking weed chronically, no pun intended, have smaller hippocampuses often than kids who are not. And hippocampus is the seat of, memory consolidation, memory formation. And, I like to talk to kids about these goals you have out there, whether it's college or whether it's graduate school or whether it's a job where you have to juggle a lot of things. Your short-term memory is affected by your weed use. When you use it as an adolescent, that can be short-term, temporary while you're using, but it's also long-term, and that is not the case, generally speaking, in adulthood. So things that are very dangerous to adolescents, a little bit less so when they are adults. So it's that brain being done forming thing that really, I find, is a more reasonable way to talk about this. Lots of ways you can approach it, but that's just one.
Okay, ladies, I know you love prevention and skill building. So Lynn has her 3 favorite skills that help manage anxiety. Problem solving, autonomy, and flexibility are skills that help manage one's anxiety. Let's talk about the skills that you outline for prevention.
Can I add one thing to that list, which is an emphasis on process of becoming, learning, practicing, whatever, over end product. We really, really need kids to believe us when we say things like, I'm okay with the fact that you got a low grade on this, but what I need is for you to learn something from this experience. What are you going to do differently next time? What are you going to leave behind that's not working? All that sort of stuff. And for kids who are highly anxious, pulling back from the difference between that B+ and an A-, or pulling it away from the grade, or the fact that you didn't get the trophy, or the fact that you didn't get the award, to process. How are you going to be better moving on? That kind of stuff I find, is a really great way to short circuit that anxiety spiral. At least it was when I was teaching high school and middle school. So anyway.
Not only do you get to add to your list, but you get your own list. You don't have to use Lynn's list. They can be different skills we can talk about.
Lynn's list is good. I like Lynn's list. Lynn's list is great.
I'm a process person, right? I mean, everybody who's listened to this podcast knows content doesn't matter to me. It's all about process. How do you respond? For me, it's how do you change the relationship to what you're doing or not doing? How do you change your relationship to the anxiety when it shows up? I don't care if it's about bees or thunder or schoolwork. Yeah, it's what are we learning from doing? The brain learns experientially. Yeah, I like the way that you talked about process just then. If we're talking about preventing the development of substance use disorder, now we also know that preventing anxiety or helping with anxiety and depression also helps to prevent substance use disorder, because self-medication for anxiety is rampant, particularly in teenage years.
That's why I drank. I have anxiety disorder, and I have since I can remember.
Yeah. All right. So what's on your list? What do you want parents to hear? The skills they got to develop.
So there are a bunch of ways to get at this, but I would love to talk about the fact that the reason the word inoculation is in the title of this book is because there is a field, an area of study called inoculation theory. An inoculation is when you show the body, for example, a vaccine, you show the body a fake version of the virus so that when the real version of the virus comes along, it's like, oh, I've seen this before. I can do this. It's kind of like building that kind of self-efficacy in a human being, where you practice ways that you could turn down a drink if you didn't want to drink at a party. In fact, there's 2.5 pages in the book. That's my favorite part, I have to say, and it's not really even my stuff. I ask kids, adolescents, to give me excuses they could use at a party if they didn't want to lose face, but didn't want to drink, whatever. So use those excuses. And yeah, sometimes that means practicing. That means helping kids have the refusal skills to be able to be fluent enough with those, to feel comfortable enough with those so that they can say no when it really matters. So some of the ways you can do that, teaching them how their brain works, giving them reasons that they might want to make better decisions about their brain health, helping them see, for example, if your 8th grader is offered a beer at someone's house and they say, no thanks. And the person says back, oh, come on, it's no big deal. Everybody does it. But your 8th grader knows what I reveal in the addiction inoculation, which is that no, only around 25%, 24.7% of 8th graders report they've had more than a sip of alcohol by the end of 8th grade. And your kid doesn't have to say that or know that
well, actually,
down to the 10th. But they can know that that's just not true. Everybody's not doing it. What's so interesting about the statistics is, I wasn't even going to write a college chapter for this book because I'm like, well, why bother? Animal House, everybody drinks in college. And that's not true either. In fact, 72% of all the alcohol consumed on college campuses is consumed by the heaviest binge drinkers on the college campus. If you answer like 10 questions for me, I can tell you how likely your kid is to drink on their college campus and whether they're likely to be a binge drinker or not. All of those kind of refusal skills, understanding how their brain works and why drinking in adolescence and using in adolescence is different than in adulthood, giving them the support to know that they can call you for a ride, you can come up with a family contract, all of that sort of stuff. Those are all skills, all tied in with this thing called self-efficacy, which is helping your kid understand that if they're uncomfortable with a situation, they can make a decision that will move the situation in a positive direction for them. And the problem comes when we have kids with really low levels of self-efficacy, either because they've been in group homes or foster care and they've been moved around a lot and they can't change that. They've been abused or neglected, and no matter what they do, they can't change that. Kids who have very, very high control parents, and believe me, I've met them at the rehab, very, very wealthy kids with every resource in the world who feel like they have zero control over their own life. All of these kids tend to have lower levels of self-efficacy, and self-efficacy is one of the best things we can give kids. Not only for their academic achievement and their success in life and their social skills and all that stuff, but also for their substance use.
In the anxiety depression biz, the way I talk about that is that there is some interesting research that kids who are allowed to practice saying no at home do better with peer pressure out in the world. Kids who feel like they are heard, kids who learn how to respectfully disagree. And it's that high control parent, which is the my way or the highway parent, which is very common in anxious families, that sets kids up for not really knowing how to express their opinion in a whole bunch of different ways, and also doesn't give them the confidence or the practice to stand up to lousy peer pressure. So it all is the same stuff of how do you practice saying no in all sorts of different settings.
We know that authoritarian parents, high control, high demand, but low empathy, low support, those parents have kids with higher levels of substance use disorder and lower levels of self-efficacy. Those things are related. Whereas authoritative parents who have very high expectations for their kids, but at the same time also have empathy, are able to do some perspective taking with their kids, are able to have good communication with their kids. Kids feel like they can come to them and trust them. And now we're back to the emphasis on process over end product, because if my kid really believes that I believe that what is most important in this situation is that you learn from it, they're going to be more likely to continue to communicate with me. So that's important stuff to know.
Yeah. Consistent warmth we talk about. You have consistent messages. The values in the family are clearly laid out. And there's warmth that goes along with that. Warmth goes a long way, for sure.
For another skill that I think is incredibly important, I got to go over to the therapy world, to your world, and talk about the fact that in order to tame your emotions, you got to name your emotions. And so kids who grow up knowing how to identify and articulate how they're feeling, even if it's, I have a tummy ache, this happens to be a very personal story for me, also for Georgia, one of the people I profiled in the book, both of us, stomach aches as little kids. And there was less awareness of anxiety in young children and that it can come out as this stomach ache sort of situation. Understanding that the more we help kids put words to their emotions, whether it's those face charts of different facial expressions, whether it's talking very specifically about how we're feeling, sweetie, I'm about to go to this work event and I'm feeling a little bit nervous. What do you do when you're feeling a little bit nervous? One of the things we know is that when kids have mindfulness practices and have what we call more integrated brains, where their upper brain and their lower brain are sort of talking to each other more, those kids tend to not need substances as much, not turn to substances as much. And mindfulness practices can be really, really useful. So I tried to get my daughter to do some mindfulness practices. It was Dan Siegel's sort of aware guided meditation. She totally wasn't into it. I tried really, really hard. What was fascinating was she backed out of that. She refused to finish the 30 days I asked her to do with me. But later on, I realized she had set up a meditation area in her room that she was using to manage her anxiety. This is going to freak some parents out. My kid is a very particular kind of kid. She has asked for her Christmas present. She's asked for a meditation retreat, a silent meditation retreat as her Christmas present this year. So no, I'm not saying I caused this. I'm not saying I caused that cascade. Just because our strategies for mindfulness or organization or managing your time or whatever, they need to come up with their own strategies. But the more strategies we expose them to, and the more we expose them to in terms of, seeing me exercise and meditate and do yoga, and my daughter's gone to yoga classes with me and stuff like that, the more we expose them to that and the more we model that for them, the more likely they are to sort of adopt that as a part of their life.
One of the questions that I would pose to you, you just touched on it a little bit, because having done the podcast with Lynn so much and then being raised in a family with a ton of alcoholics, it has occurred to me very much that being unable to handle discomfort is one of the driving forces and patterns of why people would start to drink. Call it social anxiety. I'm uncomfortable with these people. I will drink for that lubrication to engage, all of those types of things. So as a parent, I've got kids and I have been working to help them know their discomfort. But I ask both of you, if parents are really working on this and tackling being comfortable with being uncomfortable, is that the most important thing you think we should be doing?
I love this so much because in The Gift of Failure, I talk very specifically about some research around autonomy supportive parenting and the likelihood that kids are able to complete tasks that are challenging for them, that make them frustrated. Kids who have parents who support their autonomy supportive parents. Read the work of Wendy Grolnick. Read the book Autonomy Supportive Parenting by Emily Edlin. Read The Gift of Failure. Those kids are going to be more likely to complete challenging tasks when you're not around. Autonomy supportive parenting means sort of being there to guide, being there to redirect, being there to sort of talk about ways to continue. And the kids seem to have more facility with that feeling of frustration. It doesn't freak them out to the point where they just sort of quit. Whereas parents who are highly directive or controlling with their kids and tell their kids how to do things every step of the way, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, that kind of thing. Those kids are a lot more likely to give up on challenging tasks when they are presented to them, and especially when the parents aren't there. So as a teacher, that's incredibly important information for me because I need kids who are willing to keep trying the things that are a little bit frustrating for them, because there's this thing called desirable difficulties, which are tasks that are a little bit harder to parse, a little bit harder to figure out. You're not handed all of the details of how to do it. Kids who are able to complete tasks that present desirable difficulties learn more deeply in the short term and more durably over the long term. It's an incredibly powerful task. So just from a learning perspective, you are doing amazingly well. Also from a substance use perspective. One of the quotes I love the most in the book is from Chris Herron. He was a Boston Celtic. He was also addicted to opiates. There's an anecdote about him in his full warm-ups for the Celtics, waiting on the curb for his dealer to show up because he was withdrawing from opiates and couldn't play unless he got some opiates in him. And he talks about the fact that we talk so much about the last drink. So for me, that was getting blackout drunk at my mom's birthday party. 0 out of 10, do not recommend. However, that was my last drink. I can tell all the war stories, blah, blah, blah. The thing we need to be talking about more is the first drink, the first day. Why on that day in your friend's basement did you feel like you weren't enough as you were, or you needed to change who you are, or whatever that thing is? And so in helping your kids feel more comfortable with frustration, with just challenges, with feelings that don't feel good, that's fantastic. You're also coming at it from the perspective of a parent who's willing to see your kids be frustrated and not fall apart, because it makes us feel so much better to just solve the problem for them, right? In The Gift of Failure, I talk about my daughter who at the time was 9 and unable to tie her own shoes. And that was 100% because I did it for her, because she would say things like, I'm so dumb, I can't do this, da 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 da. And I just didn't want her to feel that way about herself. And so I did it for her. But what I was doing was saying, hey, sweetie, I'll just do that for you. And what she was hearing was, I don't think you're competent enough to do that yourself. So from so many angles, Robin, you are killing it. Just killing it.
Well, thanks.
On that one front, I'm not going to give you a blanket statement,
Right.
But right there with that sort of parenting method, you're doing great.
Well, let's ask one more question about that then too. Lynn and I have done an episode on the mommy wine culture, and we're not fans.
Oh, don't get me started.
Oh,
Yeah,
boy.
we're not fans.
Think about what that is saying to your kid. When you say something like, Mommy really needs a drink, what you're saying is, you stress me out so badly that I need a drink. And let's take the kid out of it. People ask me all the time, if I'm trying to keep my kid from using substances, does that mean I can't drink in my own house? And my answer is absolutely, that does not mean that you can't drink in your own house. I'm an alcoholic, so I don't drink. I have substance use disorder. My husband does not. What that does mean, though, is that we model for our kids that occasionally a drink gets opened in the house and it's had with, a meal and all that sort of stuff. But we never ever say things like, man, I had the worst day. I really need a drink.
I really need a drink.
Right. Or we're going to grandma's house for Thanksgiving and there better be enough wine there because this is going to be a day. What we're saying is, ooh, uncomfortable feeling
that I can't handle it. I'm going to manage my...
Right.
Yeah, no, I grew up in a household where alcohol was the reward of tough feelings and a hard day. My husband and I don't drink. And I used to drink a glass of wine occasionally, but not really on a regular basis. And I love to entertain. Lynn and I did this episode on the mommy wine culture. And after we did that episode, I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to drink anymore. I mean, I might have 1 or 2 drinks a year. We still have this nice wine because I used to like curate nice bottles. And so my husband and I had kind of like a conversation about it. We shouldn't have this wine in the house because I don't drink and I really don't want this wine in front of the kids. And I said, well, I spent a lot of money on that wine and we don't drink it very often.
That wine was $12.99. I have no idea what a bottle of wine costs. Yeah.
So, but my attitude was the fact that we have wine that's been sitting there for years. Aren't we also modeling that you don't have to open it and you don't have to drink it too? And I don't know the answer. This is something I still look at this wine collection and say, what do we do here?
I may not have the answer for everyone, but I can tell you we have flogged this topic from every angle. Where we've landed in our house, and I have to say where my parents have landed because I got into recovery before my parent did, and they're handling it in a very similar way, actually, which really interesting. So my husband does have a drink occasionally, but there is never, ever open alcohol in our house beyond like when he is actively consuming it. If we have people coming over, he'll buy a bottle of wine. If we're going to someone's house, we want to take a bottle of wine with us, we'll take it. If people come to our house and they bring bottles of wine to our house, it can be a bonus for them because if we don't open that bottle, we'll say, if you'd like to take your wine back home with you, that would be great, whatever. The bottle of wine is opened, then it just doesn't have a place in our house. And not because I feel like I'm going to be possessed by some demon and run to the kitchen and throw it all down my throat, but because this has been really interesting to learn about my husband is he doesn't want me to have to think about it. So what we're modeling for our kids is the kind of empathy and perspective taking that you would want to have for a spouse. And is it inconvenient for my husband to have to throw away or get rid of half a bottle of wine, especially if it's a nice bottle of wine? Probably. There have been a couple times where I'm like, okay, I'll make beef stew with it tomorrow. And if I don't make that beef stew, then we'll throw it away kind of thing. But that's been the decision we've made. And it can get tricky depending on various things. But again, in my parents' house, they kept 1 or 2 bottles of wine in case they have guests. And then same thing, if it's open, they just get rid of it.
That works for me. And that's funny you say that because we only serve alcohol if we're having people over. It's never if it's just us. We had like a few inches of this nice bottle. And like you said, Lynn, what is a nice bottle of wine? Yeah. But he was getting ready to pour it down the sink. And my gut reaction was like, hey, that's a nice bottle of wine. Don't pour that down the sink. But now that I hear that, I'm like, why shouldn't he just throw that?
Okay, look at it this way. My son is an economist. And if he were here, he would be saying, that's your sunk cost fallacy. The money has been spent. Yes. It's sort of like you sign up for me, it was a class that I signed up for that was just really awful, but I couldn't get my money back. And my husband's like, you don't need to keep going to that class that is not serving you. Just because you spent the money on it does not mean that you then, and I'm a Yankee, so I'm going to be a lot more likely to feel like I need to do that. I'm very frugal. And so I get that impulse, but it's a sunk cost situation here. And if it's not bringing you joy and you don't want it there and you're going to have to think about it, then, get rid of it.
So I just want to ask both of you this then, because you referenced your own personal history of anxiety as a teenager. A lot of families listening have teens who they feel have anxiety with the content being social. They're hearing you all say this. What are the first steps to take?
So the first step for me, and I think, Jessica, you would agree with this, if you are a socially anxious teenager and you discover alcohol, it is a miracle drug, isn't it? It is so disinhibiting, and they get sucked into it very quickly and oftentimes very early on. So the goal is, for one, as Jessica said, to give a lot of information about how this impacts your brain and how this impacts your thinking and how this puts you at risk. I mean, I'm very clear. Jessica, just so you know, both of my grandfathers were alcoholics. My husband's family is rife with substance abuse, including a sister who was sober for 9 years, who is now currently not, and it's been horrible. We were very clear with our boys growing up what went on in our families and what the risks were. So I think you would agree with that. Like, we talked about it very openly. If you've got a socially anxious teenager, the thing is not to talk to them about how to feel comfortable in social situations. As soon as you say to a kid, look, you should be able to feel like, oh, you're so nice, or people like you, or this is a really fun party. You're saying to them, in order for you to be in a social situation, the goal is for you to feel calm, for you to feel comfortable, for you to feel okay. As soon as you give that message to a socially anxious kid, either they're out, they're not going to go, which is a whole other host of problems, or they're going to try and find a way to feel comfortable. The language has to be, you step in and you feel uncomfortable, and it is experiential learning. And there are certain situations, I'm a pretty extroverted person, well, probably very extroverted person, pretty socially adept. And there are situations in which I feel uncomfortable. So we want to normalize, like you were saying, emotional literacy, the work of Mark Brackett. How do we teach kids that it's okay to feel what they're going to feel? I think that one of the issues that has happened that is absolutely pushing the weed use and the alcohol use is that we have narrowed the definition of what is a normal human experience with this idea that I have to feel good, I have to feel happy, I have to feel comfortable.
Or never, ever feel pain. I mean, that's been the problem. Luckily, oral surgeons have been reducing the number of, how often they, after wisdom teeth. For lots and lots of people, an NSAID or a Tylenol is going to suffice. My eldest got his wisdom teeth, actually, when both of my kids got their wisdom teeth out, and they automatically handed us these prescriptions. I said, well, we'll take the one for the opiates just in case. And then we burned it when that was over, because our expectation that we should just never, ever feel pain, that has never in human history been a thing. Very, very well-meaning doctor prescribed me Xanax when I had been not sleeping. He was so well-meaning. He really thought he was helping. And after 30 days, it was either 30 or 60, I had a rockin' and rollin' Xanax addiction. It took me 3 days of vomiting to get off that stuff. It was awful. So I think you're absolutely right. I was talking about the tummy aches earlier, talking about the way that anxiety or whatever the problem is that, you're having can manifest in other ways too. That, anxiety sometimes can make our tummies hurt. So anyway, talking to kids about that's super important, just like it's really important from an education perspective as a teacher of 20 years and as a former education journalist, talking to kids from a very, very young age about the lower brain versus the upper brain and about, sometimes when you want to reach out and just punch that other kid, that's your lower brain reacting, and that's totally valid and natural. But what we want to do is tap into that upper brain, which is the like, okay, what would happen if I hit this kid? Or why do you think he did that to me? Or maybe I could talk to him. Kids who are taught about their brain and the lower brain, upper brain divide are more likely to have awareness of how to tap into those higher brain function skills as they get older and as those start to sort of connect. I've seen kids do it in kindergartens. There's a wonderful place in Dallas called the Momentous Institute. And in kindergarten, they're teaching kids about their upper brain and lower brain. And it's just fantastic. I think all of that stuff is really important.
We're going to take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to ask a really unpopular question about medications.
Hey, have you heard of HelloFresh? It's a meal subscription service where you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients, seasonal recipes delivered right to your door. Skip trips to the grocery store. Count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. It's why it's America's #1 meal kit.
HelloFresh delivers all those pre-portioned ingredients you need to make an easy homemade meal. All the proteins, veggies, sauces, spices, and more arrive in your box, along with simple instructions that walk you through each step in the cooking process. They have great pictures, and even kids can follow them and cook dinner.
You might like the fit and wholesome, or quick and easy, or vegetarian. You'll always find something that works for you and that your family will love from HelloFresh.
We've been HelloFresh customers, I think, for 8 months now.
Wow.
It works perfectly for us. It has turned my whole family into chefs for dinner so that it's not all on me. Thank you, HelloFresh.
Get 10 free meals at HelloFresh.com/free Flusterclux. Applied across 7 boxes, new subscribers only, varies by plan. That's 10 free HelloFresh meals just by going to hellofresh.com/free Flusterclux.
It's America's #1 meal kit for a reason.
Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. How cool is that? It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. On the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs. It gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management.
All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fat or mostly carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements.
You can also breathe into it before or after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time.
Your metabolism is your body's engine, and it's how your body turns the food you eat into fuel that keeps you going. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy, better sleep.
The list goes on. It helps with tracking your cycles, the onset of menopause. You can adjust your recommendations to keep your body healthy. You can keep your energy up, and you can stave off those cravings.
So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/fluster to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/fluster for 15% off your purchase.
Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Okay, so now back to the show.
I love this conversation, and now I want to ask something that both of you should just let it all out. Parents listening here have been trying to help kids manage their anxiety and have been looking for every resource they can. Some of them have been advised to prescribe medications for this anxiety, often by non-psychiatrists. Pediatricians have had to step in. How do you use medications without modeling the message that other substances are the answer instead of skills?
This is a fantastic question. In our family, that means that my kids know that I have anxiety disorder and that I have been medicated for my anxiety since my early 20s when I stopped sleeping, basically, and having these, even just recalling these anxiety attacks, just that freaks me out. They also know that I meditate. They also know that I work out. They also know that my husband and I have various practices that have become a part of our daily life that we do together in order to wind down before bedtime. So they see that from us. And when my daughter, and there's all sorts of stuff I could talk about with my daughter because my daughter has had depression. My daughter has had some very serious anxiety. She's also LGBTQ. So she's at higher risk for example, substance use disorder, that kind of stuff. When we went looking to help her deal with her anxiety, we got her a therapist. And when her doctor started talking about medications, we said, let's go with the non-addictive options first. And there are non-addictive options for managing anxiety. And I am not a physician, but there is an antihistamine that also has anti-anxiolytic properties that you can take as needed. And she has decided not to move on to heavier medication because this is working for her. This is part of her meditating thing as well, and wanting to learn more about meditating because she finds that it helps her quiet the voices in her head about how she's not good enough and how she did that embarrassing thing when she was 4 and, that kind of stuff. It's been really good for us to have that conversation. And we've said we are open to, your mom is getting a systemic anti-anxiolytic medication and for a long time. And if that's something that it will work for you and we need to move to that, we're willing to talk about that. But in the meantime, let's try mindfulness, exercise, good diet, and avoiding caffeine and devices and, all that sort of stuff first.
All right, so let me weigh in here. This will be no surprise to people who have listened. For one, as you tell the story about your Xanax, Jessica, and you say very nicely, the well-meaning physician. I've honestly had it with that because like we know what benzos do. There are plenty of warnings about benzos, and they're still so frequently prescribed, including to children. So benzodiazepines, everybody. So, Ativan, Xanax, Valium, Klonopin. They're highly addictive. They are horrible to get off of. So I've had it with, it's not so bad, because we know it's so bad. And if I know it and you know it, then the people who are prescribing it also know it.
Also, P.S., if I had alcohol use disorder at that time in my life, which I did not, I wasn't really drinking during that time in my life, I could be dead. I mean, benzodiazepines plus alcohol are one of the more dangerous combinations out there.
Correct. And that's what, before opiates came along, that's what killed all the celebrities, right? When you hear about it was often a combination. One of my mentors, Michael Yapko, who I talk about a lot, one of the world's experts on depression, he often says we want skills over pills. Now, he is not saying don't take pills. And one of his things with antidepressants, he says, look, if they worked, I'd be all in. If they were as great as they have been marketed to be, I'd be all in. They're just not. We have to continue to focus, just like you said, Jessica, on what are the skills that we develop? What are the things that we do in all areas of our life to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves? The problem with the medications alone is that we are saying to kids, when you feel uncomfortable, take this pill. It gets very easily translated into other areas that are far more dangerous than taking an SSRI. The most common treatment of depression in this country is medication alone. And the least effective treatment, long-term, of depression in this country is medication alone. The things that Jessica and I have been talking about for every minute that we've been having this conversation is how do we help kids develop all of these important skills that are about emotional management? I talk about learning your operating system. Question I ask of teenagers all the time. I want you to tell me the things you know about you that make your mood worse, the things you know about you that make your mood better, and the things you know about you that make your mood better in the short term, but are a bad long-term plan. And we have to get kids to start talking about how their bodies and brains work and what are the things we do that make us feel better and make us feel worse. It is just become so common. And I'm sure you dealing with this too, Jessica, when you're on the road, is this idea that taking gummies, that using pot, that it's medicinal, that it's the best thing you can do for your anxiety. We just have to keep talking to kids about the fact that taking substances is not the way. Yeah.
And as someone who, I hate fear-mongering. I hate it. And the media does this to us a lot. The one place I'm willing to strike a little fear into your heart is around these drugs that we've just been mentioning, but the counterfeit versions, and we cannot tell the difference between the counterfeit and the not counterfeit, and fentanyl. So fentanyl is what is killing kids today. That is what is killing kids. And I was on a conference just recently talking about fentanyl and counterfeit, especially bars of Xanax and things like that. If you have taken Xanax or Klonopin or something like that, or opiates like a Percocet or whatever, that you've gotten online, more likely than not, you have had some fentanyl in those drugs. And that right there, the idea that we would teach kids to go to something like that. And also, this is coming from someone who, both of my nieces have friends who are dead, and they were, 18 years old, wanted to party at graduation, bought some Xanax, what they thought was Xanax over the internet. And these were cousins, and they are both dead. And that story, I was just out in Ventura, California with this wonderful couple who lost their son because it looked legit. It looked right. All the numbers were right on it, but it was fentanyl and he is dead.
Yep. College classmate, same thing. Daughter went off to New York to be out in the world and was dead within 12 hours.
Yeah, this is the one place where I am willing to scare my kids a little bit. And we know that scared straight does not work, but scaring them about the lethality and the chances that what they get, if they're not getting it through a pharmacy, is going to have fentanyl in it. The odds are just too high. And in fact, when my niece moved to Los Angeles, the very first thing I did was send her the links to all the places where she could get Narcan and harm reduction kits. Both fentanyl test strips and Narcan are the two things that I've begged all of my kids to have on them. They're available in the first aid kit in my daughter's dorm. The cool thing about Narcan, just for anyone who's listening, is you can give Narcan to anyone and it'll be fine. So if you make a mistake and the person has just passed out or the person doesn't actually need it, if you shove that sniffer of Narcan up their nose and give them a dose, it will not hurt them.
Oh, that's great to know.
Narcan, you can give a couple of doses of Narcan to someone and it's not going to do a thing except for glom up their opiate receptors. So knowing that, and I carry one around with me, I have one in the car, although someone just told me recently that temperature can affect the efficacy of it. You can get these through your local health department. You can get them from lots of different places. You can get them at many pharmacies, depending on your state. And it's just really important for us to know and to be a little bit afraid of fentanyl. I think it's just an important thing to do right now.
Yeah, I think that's great information that I bet a lot of people had no idea.
This has been such a great conversation with two professionals at making people uncomfortable and angry. And I think that should be the requirement for all of our guests going forward.
Oh, wait. Can I make Jessica angry one more time?
Oh, please, go ahead.
Okay. I'm sure that you don't enjoy the wine bottles that you can give to your child's teacher that have a picture of your child's face on it.
I can top that.
All right, go ahead.
I was at one of my favorite bookstores in the United States, Book People in Austin, Texas. And I took a picture they have some glasses and things like that. And why they had these, I have no idea. But it said, the glasses, these goblets said, I teach, therefore I drink.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah. Or the sippy cups, the wine glass sippy cups, all that kind of stuff drives me bananas. And yes,
drives me bananas.
I've seen the wine bottles with the picture of the kid's face. Like, no. For also, you don't know anything about me. What if I am a non-drinker? My kid stresses you out so much that I'm going to give you some alcohol, all over the place. No.
Yeah. All over the place. No. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the wealth of information and the way that you present it. And it's so coherent. And I hope that people will really listen to this and get a copy of the Addiction Inoculation and Gifts to Failure too. They are both just so full of helpful information. And I think the tone of them, I think your voice in your writing, Jessica, is one that is just very welcoming and invites parents in to talk about and think about these difficult subjects in a way that I hope makes a difference. I bet it does make a difference. So thanks for doing what you're doing.
Can I tell your listeners about a few resources?
Yes, please.
So I have made because Instagram Reels can only be like 90 seconds long. So I have made over 290-second long videos that are indexed at jessicalahey.com under videos. It's the entire book, The Addiction Inoculation, broken down into these 90-second videos. And then also for Gift to Failure, same thing. There's 2 different menu items there.
They're really good. I've watched them, everybody, because I follow you on Instagram. They're fabulous. It's such a great idea. Yeah.
And then I'm at Teacher Lahey over at Instagram. On my website at jessicalahey.com under speaking, there's a big button that says download speaking bibliography. And it has all of my very favorite books on lots of topics, like that Autonomy Supportive Parent book by Emily Edlund's on there, or books about teaching kids about money, Ron Lieber's The Opposite of Spoiled, all that kind of stuff, backing up when you're helping your kid with college stuff. There's topics for all of that stuff on that bibliography, and they're linked so that you can just click right through.
You have so much to share. I hope you come back for another conversation in the future.
Absolutely. I'm working on book 3 right now, so hopefully we'll get to talk about that sometime.
I don't want to write another book.
Well, I know a podcast you could listen to motivate you. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. And if you found this podcast helpful, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find this information.
And if you'd like to dig deeper on any of these topics, we have specialized playlists on our Spotify profile, and the link is in the show notes. Topics like teens, depression, and OCD. Bye, Lynn.
Bye, Robin.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.